Hello, welcome to our next PowerPoint here for the ecology unit. This PowerPoint is going to take you through how energy flows through an ecosystem and show you some relationships between different feeding relationships as far as herbivores, carnivores, autotrophs, heterotrophs, etc. You see that there's some links here. Those are links that you're going to be using during your activities to some brain pop and other video clips. Let's get into it. Before we really begin, though, I want you to think about what is the difference between an autotroph producer and heterotroph consumer. Try to give an example of each type of organism. And what you can do is actually pause this screencast and try to answer this to yourself, and then when you feel like you've got an answer, press play and you can see if you got it right. Okay, welcome back. So do you have an example for each of these types of organisms? Well, first you should know that an autotroph producer is something that is able to make its own food by directly taking the sun's energy and turning it into another form of energy called ATP, or maybe even glucose, a type of sugar. So this is done by photosynthesis by any kind of plant or tree. So if you set something like a plant for an autotroph producer example, you'd be right. As far as a heterotroph consumer is concerned, a heterotroph consumer is an organism that needs to eat others for its energy source. And there's 3 different types of heterotroph consumers. Do you know them all? Well, first we have herbivores, things that eat plants. Next there's carnivores. And carnivores, they eat only meat, so other animals. And then you have omnivores, who both eat plant and meat. Maybe some of you even said decomposers, and you'd be right too. Decomposers that eat dead things and recycle nutrients back into the environment, well, they're also a type of heterotroph consumer. So mushrooms are not plants, they're not autotroph producers. Mushrooms are actually heterotroph consumers as belonging to a decomposer. Okay, so let's get into the lesson here. What you need to know about how energy flows through an ecosystem is that it happens through food chains. And food chains are a series of steps in which organisms take or transfer energy from one level to the next by being eaten or eating something else, or being eaten themselves. So here's an example of a classic ocean food chain. You can see that all food chains start with producers, or autotrophs. And this here says algae. Algae are a type of producer autotroph. And you'll see that there's a series of arrows that are going from left to right. Now these arrows don't represent what eats what. For example, algae do not eat zooplankton, and zooplankton do not eat small fish. And small fish don't eat squid, and squid certainly do not eat sharks. Instead, the arrows show the direction in which the energy is flowing from one organism to the next in the ecosystem. So the way that you would actually read this food chain is that algae, an autotroph producer, gives their energy to zooplankton, a herbivore, which is a type of heterotroph consumer, and zooplankton give their energy to small fish, which are a type of carnivore, so they eat other animals, also heterotroph consumers. And these small fish give their energy to squid, another heterotroph consumer carnivore, and squid give their energy to sharks, which are another type of heterotroph consumer carnivore. Now the only thing that's missing here from this particular food chain are omnivores and decomposers. Not all food chains have them, but you should also know that sometimes there's questions that arise on the Reads exam that ask you which type of organism is missing. And more often than not, it's the decomposer level. Because we tend to kind of forget about decomposers because they eat dead things, and it's not a nice linear fashion for the food chain. But the role of decomposers we should not overlook because they're really important. If we never decomposed and recycled nutrients back into the environment, into the soil, first of all, you had dead bodies piled up high. Think of everything that's ever died, and if it never decomposed, that'd be a lot of dead things. And second, the nutrients being recycled back into the soil are really important because it helps producers and other plants grow again. But this is how you should be able to make a food chain. If I asked you to make a food chain, you always start out with producer autotrophs, the things that can make their own energy from the sun. For this example, I chose a plant, and underneath I labeled it as producer autotroph. The next part of the food chain, the next level, is creating the heterotroph consumer level, also known as herbivores. Because herbivores are the first things to eat producer autotrophs. They eat plants. Herbivores eat plants. So in this example here, you have a plant with an arrow drawn to a deer. So the plant gives its energy to the deer. And again, plants are producer autotrophs. They make their own energy. They give that energy to heterotroph consumers. And deer are a type of herbivore. They only eat plants. The last part of constructing this food chain here is you add an omnivore or carnivore. In this instance, I chose the carnivore of a wolf. And here we see again, I add in that plants are producer autotrophs, and wolves are both heterotroph consumers, while deer are herbivore heterotroph consumers, and wolves are carnivore heterotroph consumers because they only eat animals, they only eat meat. Lastly, you should add in the decomposers detritivores, but you'll do this later on, hopefully, when you're making your own food chains at the end of this slideshow. This picture here was taken from the textbook on page 71. If you want to see a closer look, you can grab one and bring it to your table. What you should know is that food webs, they link all food chains together. So in this salt marsh, you can see there's a lot of different arrows, and at first it looks a little bit messy. But then you can go back and pick out and see there's food chains going through. So for example, here you see this marsh grass giving its energy to the rib mussel, a herbivore, and the rib mussel giving its energy to this bird called a herring. So these food chains make up this food web. See if you can pick out another food chain. And when you do, press play. So you can pause me for a moment, pick out a food chain, and then when you come back, see if you have one that you can share. This picture should look familiar in regards to the last slideshow you saw when you're reviewing your ecology vocabulary, which, by the way, is really important. As you see, I used a lot of that vocab from that last slideshow in this one, so everything is building upon each other here. And this actually shows a food web as well. You see a lot of different arrows of food chains making up a food web. What I would like you to try to do is, just like I showed you in the previous few slides, see if you can pick out and actually write down some different food chains. Practice labeling if they're autotrophs, producers, or heterotroph consumers. If you label it as a heterotroph consumer, tell me what type of heterotroph consumer is it, just like you saw on the previous slide. Is it a herbivore? Is it a carnivore? Is it an omnivore? Or maybe it's a decomposer. So that's what you should do here before you go on into the next set of activities for this particular target. That's the end of the slideshow. Feel free to go back and review. But that's food chains, food webs, and how energy flows through an ecosystem.